I get this question asked a lot. So here's the difference between aperture, your f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO. And I'm going to be using the Sony a6000 with a nifty 50 as an example. Aperture, f-stop, one and the same. Your shutter speed and your ISO. Aperture, okay. The f-stop is 32, means you're going to get less light in, therefore you're going to have a sharper image or video. However, it's going to be very dark. Now, instead of f1.4, you're letting in more light, therefore you can focus on one subject and have more of a nice creamy bokeh background. Remember, f1.4, more light, focus on one subject, creamy background. f32 or higher, or whatever the case, darker image, less light, darker image, you won't see anything. Shutter speed comes down to how much motion blur you want in your video or photo. The higher the shutter speed, the less motion blur. The lower the shutter speed, well, you get the idea. Now, ISO is your extra light that you would need just in case. If these two are not cohesive with each other, that's where the ISO comes in to give it that extra bump of light that it needs. However, a good rule of thumb is to always keep your ISO at 100. The smaller the ISO, the less light you're letting in. The higher the ISO number, well, it becomes grainy and blown out. However, just remember this good rule of thumb. I use the video rule of thumb. If I'm shooting 24 frames per second, it's 1/50 or 1/60. If I'm doing 60 frames per second, it's 1/20 or 1/25. I use the 120 or 1/25 for video and photo. I never personally shoot at 24 frames per second because I feel like it looks like trash. I don't care what anybody says. That's just my opinion. I use these settings personally for photo and video. I always shoot my photo and video at 60 frames per second, 1/20, 1/25. My shutter speed is always going to be between 1/20, 1/25. My f-stop, let's say if I'm just focusing on one specific subject or small detail, I always going to shoot between f1.4 or f2.8. Again, this nifty 50 is at an f1.8. So I will shoot at an f1.8. Let's say in the area that I'm in, it's too dark. Well, I will crank up my ISO to about maybe 400 and see what it looks like. If I crank it even higher, obviously it's going to look grainy. But again, their ISO will be determined on your environment. So the lights are on in my living room. So this is what we see, right? But this is what my camera sees. ISO is at 100, f1.8, and shutter speed at 1/25. I am letting so much light in, but it's not registering it, or at least the sensor is. This is how we compensate. We're going to bump up our ISO. That way we can find a sweet spot. So in this case, 400, 500 would be a good sweet spot. This image, ISO 100, f1.8, 1/25. This image is 500, f1.8, 1/25. Here is a side-by-side comparison. Everything's the same. The only thing I changed was the ISO. This one's at 100, this one's at 500.